Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Mondello, and I'm going to be your presenter today. Hopefully, you are here to learn about the Continuum of Care program, and specifically within that program funding opportunity, talking about the matching funds requirement that most project types are going to have as part of your project design. I am here on behalf of the Rhode Island Continuum of Care CoC Planning Group to do a training series, of which this is one session. You may have gone to other sessions this year, and I'm going to build on the topics that hopefully you learned about there. So we're just going to do a deeper dive into a very specific financial requirement for the CoC program. So again, my name is Melanie Mondello. I work for the Technical Assistance Collaborative. Most of you know us as TAC if we've worked together before. And I come to you with lots of experience about the CoC program, and I was once in your shoes, managing the program at the community level, trying to make all of the services and finances mix and match and follow all of the HUD rules. So as we go through today, please feel free to ask any questions that you have. I have a lot of information to give you, but this is your session too. You came because you probably have questions or someone told you to learn more about this. So please take this opportunity to get any questions that you have answered. If I can't answer them on the spot, I will look into it. If it's something that's more of a community level topic, I'll coordinate with Rosa and Sarah about what that means in your specific project or your specific community continuum of care implementation of your homeless programs. So just a couple housekeeping issues. We are not a large group today, but we are recording this for future people that come on board who may want to learn more about this topic. So you can keep your audio muted unless you're speaking on your microphone or asking a question. If you have questions or experiences you want to share, please do that in the first person. Make sure you're talking about your experiences. Any questions that you have, if you can put those in the Q&A box instead of the chat, that will help us keep track of them. In the chat, if you want to share ideas or resources or information based on your experience with matching funds that have worked or problems that you've solved creatively, that would be great too. But just so we can keep track of any questions, if you want to ask them in writing, please put those in the Q&A box versus the chat box. So we have a full agenda for our 2-hour session. We'll do some introductions so that I know who's with me here today. I'm going to do a brief overview of the CoC program components, which just means like project types and elements, and the eligible costs, which are things you can spend money on. There was a much deeper dive into that topic. I believe it was in August. Housing Innovations did a very deep dive onto this topic, and the recording is likely available to you on the Rhode Island CoC website. So, but I'm going to go over those as just level setting so that you know the terms that I'm going to be using as we go forward. Then I'm going to get into why you're here today, what match is to HUD, what matches specifically to the CoC program, what counts as match, the different naming conventions. And then we're going to talk number 4 about everybody's favorite topic, record keeping and monitoring. So you did a great job. You have all this documentation to show that you did a great job, get credit for all of your work. And then we're going to wrap up with some common findings that I've seen in my monitoring and that HUD is finding a lot when they're monitoring recipients who have the direct contract with HUD or subrecipients who have a contract with someone who has a direct contract with HUD. And then we have questions and wrap up. I have some space for questions in between topics. Please feel free to ask the questions when you have them. If it's something I'm going to get to later, I will let you know and ask you to hold that question. And if I don't answer it, please ask it again. I also have a small break built in for us in the middle so we can stretch, have a bio break, get a snack, whatever we need to do. This is a very important topic for your CoC program. But I will acknowledge that finances are not everybody's favorite. Sometimes this is an intimidating topic for people. So I'm going to go over again in depth what's required, but we'll take a little break so you can stretch, kind of reset, and then come back in for the second half. So, okay, first thing, poll question. So I just want people to answer this in the chat if you can. Just want to make sure I'm tailoring the information I'm giving you. So my first question is, what is your experience with designing and tracking matching resources for the CoC program project, either the one you're doing right now as a staff person, or maybe you came to your job with CoC program experience. Are you an expert? You're going to help me present today. You're going to help me answer questions, remind me of all the real rules. Are you pretty familiar, but maybe wouldn't want to be the presenter, don't want to be co-hosting with me? A little bit familiar, you knew what the words were, but like you just feel like you want more information. Maybe you're just learning about it. You started your job a month ago and someone said, hey, can you take care of this match? Like, what is that? Or maybe some of you were just told to come to this training, it's important, but you don't know why. So if you can just go ahead and pop into the chat kind of where people are, that will help me kind of tailor what I'm going to say. If I'm going along and I'm just using all the jargon and the alphabet soup of the federal government, I'm not decoding what I'm saying, please put in the chat or the QA like, hey, what does COC mean? What does, any other acronym that I may use today mean? Please don't be shy. And Rosa, please, if I'm using terms that you think I should decode and I'm not catching that on my own, please just break in audio and ask me to decode. That would be great. We'll pop some of that into the chat too if we need to decode. So, okay, I'm just looking at the chat box. I see some pretty familiar. I just saw some familiar names, so that makes sense. Somewhat, a little bit limited experience calculating the match. That makes sense. So you know what it is, but like, how do you get to the final numbers? So from those of you that responded in the chat, we have a group that, has a little bit of knowledge. If people are feeling shy, not wanting to put in the chat, like, I don't know anything, that's totally fine. Please still feel free to ask questions. I've been doing this for 20 plus years and I'm in those regulations probably every week. There's always questions I have to look up. We're all learning. So if you have a question, I can guarantee somebody else has the question or would probably like to hear the question again to make sure they have the right answer and that they've been doing it correctly. There's a lot of myths out there in the CoC program, and I hope to bust all of those today for you and give you the real information so that you can plan your time and your activities accordingly. So after years of doing this and talking about the CoC program, sometimes I just dive right in. I start like, let's talk about match. And then I realize people get confused about match because you have to talk about it at many different points in time as you're creating your project, implementing your project, and closing your project. So now when I talk about match, I like to start with this slide, which is the grant cycle and then the match and how it evolves as you go through your program design. So if any of you have ever been with a project from start to finish, the way that HUD runs their grant cycle is typically every year, sometimes every other year, but most of the times every year, there's an application where you say to your community CoC, I would like to continue this program or I would like to propose a new program. So you have an application that you're submitting to your CoC that they then submit to HUD as a group submission. And then HUD says, yes, you can do these projects. No, you can't. And there's, all of the awards that go on. So at the time of application, that I like to think of as your planning phase. So it could be a project you're running now, so you kind of know what to expect. It's a project that's been around for 5, 10, 15 years. Or it could be a brand new project where you think you know what to expect. You think you know what the people that you want to serve will need, but maybe you have a best plan and that could change. So at the application, when you're talking about match and matching funds, what HUD and your CoC is going to ask of you is, what is your plan? They're going to want to see some kind of written commitment about what your match is going to be, whether that's cash that you're bringing to the table. It could be services that a partner in the community is bringing. If you are the housing agency, maybe you have an agency that you partner with for mental health services, transportation, some other kind of service that people need to be able to get and keep their housing. So during that application, you're going to put your best plan forward. You're going to do the math based on whatever the rules are that year for the CoC program. You're going to calculate, we'll get into the numbers, but it's basically 25% match on all funds except for leasing dollars, which we'll go into in a lot more detail. But you're going to have written commitments either from your own agency to yourself saying, we're going to put cash aside, or from partners saying, okay, if you get awarded, this is what I'm going to give you, this many counseling hours, this much transportation, this much, whatever it is that your population is going to need. So that's the first time that you start talking about match. I hope that that plan is perfect and it happens just the way you want it to. Nothing changes and it all goes well. But from the time you apply to the time you get your grant can be anywhere from 6 to 11 months, depending on the cycle, where HUD is, all of the things that are going on. So when you actually get your award, they say, thank you for applying, we're going to give you the money. And then they follow up X number of months later and they actually give you your grant. If you're a brand new project, HUD is going to say, show me your match. Show me an updated letter. This match is still committed to your project. Prove to me in writing that this is your plan and it's a real plan. It's something you can execute because it's based on agreements, MOUs, which is a memorandum of understanding, letter, like an award letter for the cash match, if you're using cash to pay for the project activities. If you're a renewal project at grant execution, HUD can ask you for your documentation about match, but they may not. That doesn't mean you don't have to have it. So already we haven't even started serving anybody, right? We haven't even gotten our first dollar for this project. And we've already thought about match twice. We've come up with a plan. And then HUD says, if you want a contract, I want in writing that that plan still exists. I want the letters, the MOUs, the memorandum of understanding. So those are the first two things. And then you get your contract, you start serving people, all goes well. You also then are going to have what's called an APR, which is your annual performance report. That is 90 days after your grant closes. So when your grant closes, you have to tell HUD who you served, how much you spent, how much match you did. So long time in between getting the grant and closing the grant. You have this 15-month time period. At the conclusion of your grant term, which is the last day of your contract with HUD, they want to see that you have at least 25% match for the actual funds that you expended on the CoC program activities. So I'm just going to call it Project A. You have Project A, you got awarded $100,000, but because of turnover in either staff or people moving units, let's say you only spent $90,000 or $95,000. You only have to match or show proof that you have matching funds for the actual funds that you spent. So your application for $100,000 that got awarded would have had $25,000 of match. But if you only spent 95,000 or 90,000, you can still obviously provide that $25,000 of match. But if you're a little short because maybe you didn't serve the number of people or people chose to do different supportive services, know that you're going to be monitored and held to account based on the actual funds that you've spent as part of your project. And then, so right, you're thinking about match during all these times. Then you have the HUD monitoring. That can happen 2 to 3 years after your grant closes. So you can see you're thinking about match 12 months before and 2 to 3 years afterwards. It's a very long runway, and all of us might still be in our jobs or we might not. So I always say practice kindness, document what you're doing for match, write it down, have it in a central place that people can get it once you're gone in your grant management files, on your central servers. Don't keep this really important information only on your laptop. That could get coffee spilled on it. When you leave, someone might wipe it off accidentally before pulling off the documents that they need. So it's a very long start to finish process where you have to think about match a lot between design, execution, and closing a project. So when I hear people say, oh, I thought, I did the match 12 months ago. I'm like, well, you might want to check in and just see kind of what's happening. It's not a one and done type of activity. Another thing I wanted to mention in case we have people that are new to the HUD contracting program process is when HUD executes a grant, they have something they're calling issues and conditions. So it could be that you applied, You got a project, HUD awards you that grant, you go to sign the contract, and they're like, oh, hold on 1 second. I'm going to issue a issue and condition to you. And they do that electronically through the eSnaps platform. And basically they could say, hey, I need more information about your match, right? They could say, like, I see what you put in. Can you tell me more? Or you put in for X thing, but that doesn't match your project design. Can you please clarify? So during the issues and conditions is your first opportunity to tweak, change, modify, and finalize what you want your match commitment to be for this program based on what you can document, based on what is real, right? Because at this point, you're going to start serving people. This has to be real money or real services that are available to the people that you're there. You can't, I've heard this from people, you can't say, well, HUD didn't catch it, so it must be allowed. That's not a thing. It should be, it's not. It's your application. You have access to the regulations. You're now at this training, so you're going to know more than some of your peers about match. Just because HUD let something in an application doesn't mean it's allowable. They may not catch everything until later in your project or during monitoring. Doesn't mean that you can't have that discussion with them. But I don't want you to say, well, I heard Melanie say you can't do this, but they said I could. It's a big risk, and I wouldn't suggest taking risks of doing things that you know HUD is not going to approve. So this issues and conditions, which is typically your executive director, your finance department, your project lead, they're the ones in this document making that final contract with HUD. But this is that first time you have to change from your application to your execution to actually change and better align what you're going to use for matching resources for your project. So project implementation, here we have, we'll go over these principles throughout, but you applied, you got awarded. Now you have to do what you said. So whether it's matching funds, whether it's who you're going to serve, whether it's the type of project that you designed, as you're implementing the project, it's really important to make sure that you, as the project director or project manager, has a working budget so that you know what you think you're going to spend money on, what you're allowed to spend money on, and that you're passing that down through the staff so that you are in full compliance with either HUD's money that you're spending, or if you're using cash match from your agency, that you're also spending that cash that's being put into your project at your agency level on appropriate things that HUD would have paid for had they given you funds for the entire project. So these are just some tips that I see people miss as they're going along. They don't talk about the revised budget with staff. They forget to work proactively with coordinated entry to get referrals in to the project so that they can spend all of their money, use their match resources. And then probably most importantly, this last bullet, having a project manual. It's not the best practice to share everything verbally with staff. We're all busy. There's a lot of turnover. People are very overloaded nowadays. So having a project manual that has the guidance for the day-to-day work, how you want people to code timesheets, what can be spent in which categories, that's all really important to make sure that you're consistent, especially if you have a project that's going to be growing over time. So these are just some tips to bring back for your general project implementation. Okay, so I'm going to do, again, a brief overview of components and eligible costs. This will be the fastest overview that you've probably ever had on it. Again, Housing Innovations, I think it was in August, did a whole 2-hour session on this, and that recording is likely available to you on the CoC program website. So when I talk about program components, what I'm talking about are the high-level categories that HUD sees as housing interventions and services that they want to fund. So the services and housing interventions that HUD currently funds through the CoC program, one category is called permanent housing. Under that, there are 2 categories. Permanent supportive housing is the term that most of you may know. It's been around the longest. That is known as PSH. That is long-term housing assistance. It provides support for people with a diagnosed and documented disability. It provides a link between housing and services. There is no length of stay on permanent supportive housing. You can continue to provide assistance as long as they qualify for your project, are housed, are using your services. And again, based on what's in that program manual, this is not something where you're going to say to people, you only have a year, I can only help you for a year or two. This is meant to be permanent housing for them until they opt to move to the next opportunity that feels right for them. Permanent supportive housing can serve families, so adults and children, or individuals. A lot of permanent supportive housing, you'll hear the term chronically homeless, is dedicated to people experiencing chronic homelessness, which is at least 1 year or 4 episodes over the course of 3 years. Again, a whole other training on that topic if you want to dive in deeper. The other type of permanent housing that HUD funds that is newer, it's not new anymore, but it's newer than permanent supportive housing, is called rapid rehousing. And you'll hear that referred to as RRH. So RRH is considered permanent housing. The difference is this program can fund help with the rental assistance for up to 24 months. And then the person would take over that lease and the cost for that housing. You also, though, are providing supportive services to the people that are in that project. So same thing, housing assistance and supportive services, just a piece of the financial support for the housing unit does have a cap of up to 24 months. Rapid rehousing may be shorter, some may be longer. HUD doesn't require that people in rapid rehousing have a disability. That's important to know as you're thinking about match, because you might have different match resources for a rapid rehousing program that isn't targeting people with disabilities than you have for permanent supportive housing that is, right? There's different needs in different populations, but they are both considered permanent housing. HUD also funds transitional housing. They do that through a model called TH-RRH, which I'll go over in a second. Transitional housing is 24 months. It is more of a model where you have more intensive services. It really is, it's only 24 months. Again, it's not that it can serve people with disabilities that are documented, but it doesn't have to. It's more of a bridge model to get people to permanent housing or get people quickly out of homelessness and into either PSH, RRH if you're in this special project type, or to market rate renting or a mainstream voucher. So this is the component that HUD currently funds that will allow you to do transitional housing and rapid rehousing within one project type. So the two definitions are on the slides before to tell you kind of what the activities are. If you have a joint TH-RRH project, a lot of them are targeted to young adult populations. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it's just the way the funding has been rolled out. This model will have different match considerations depending on who is renting the units. Are you renting and then subleasing them? Are you serving young adults? Are you serving adults only? Are people going from one unit to the next? Are they moving units in between the components? There's all kinds of things you want to think about. Joint TH-RRH also has different things they can spend money on. So the eligible costs that we're going to go on, and you can see here on the right-hand side of the slide, joint TH-RRH has operating, leasing, and capital costs for the TH portion. If you're doing leasing for your TH, then you don't actually have a match requirement for those leasing dollars. That's great. There's other challenges with leasing. There's pros and cons to every bit of this, but it's just really important to know your project design. So that way, you know what your match commitment is going to be and what your eligible match activities are going to be. The reason I like to do this overview is because match at its core is a dollar spent or an in-kind service that HUD would have paid for if they funded your whole project. So as you're thinking about these project types, this is money that if HUD funded you fully, they would have paid for it. So you can't, matching funds aren't things that HUD wouldn't pay for. Things that HUD wouldn't pay for are very important. They're just not called matching funds and they can't help you with this requirement. There's also a supportive service only category. Don't get too excited. Right now, the majority of supportive service projects across the country are strictly for coordinated entry, which is the system that provides you referrals for all of your projects. But you do, as a coordinated entry project, if you're on today, you do also have a matching requirement for the activities that you're doing as part of coordinated entry, which are typically outreach, case management, and managing the whole referral intake, and then pushing out eligible participants to projects to admit. There's also a term that you may have heard called HMIS. HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System. In your community, you have what's called known as an HMIS lead. They're the ones that are working on keeping your database going, providing trainings and access so you can input data and get reports out. As a project, you could have put in an HMIS budget line item. And as part of that budget line item, you might be funding the staff time to do HMIS data entry, any licensing costs that you have to access the HMIS information, or be able to be like an input person into your HMIS system. So if you have HMIS funds, those also have a matching requirement. Or if you don't have an HMIS budget line item, this could be a source that you want to track and provide as your matching funds. So a lot of information in a very short period of time about program components. These are the resources that are still up on the HUD Exchange. If you want to learn more about this, there's a training, which is the second one, an overview of components and eligible costs. If you have new staff coming on, if you have people that are struggling with this, I definitely recommend going and having them do that training. Should definitely be part of your onboarding if you're bringing someone into the CoC program. Okay, next I'm going to talk about eligible costs. So I'm just going to give you a second to kind of look at this chart. These are all the things that HUD would pay for as part of the design of different project types. Not every project that is a PSH is going to have all of these costs in it. There's or statements, right? You're not going to have operating and rental assistance. You're going to have operating or rental assistance. You're probably not going to have leasing and rental assistance. But all of these things are eligible things that HUD might pay for when you're designing your project and doing that annual application. That is where you say, okay, these are all the things HUD could do. This is what I want to do with my project. You submit that to the CoC. They say yes or no. They include your project, put it forth to HUD. They say yes or no. And then you are locked into actually what your project is. So this is a slide you want to like asterisk, star, print out when you get the handout. This is what's important for your project: eligible versus approved. So when you're spending your HUD funds, there's a lot that's eligible, right? This whole list here of construction, leasing, rental assistance, services, HMIS, all of this is allowed. But your project had a design, your CoC, you promised them certain things, you won a competition both locally and nationally, and so you have to make sure that you are spending your money on approved costs. The HUD money will go to approved costs. Approved costs are also important based on your project design and your matching funds. So if you are a PSH project, you can do certain things. If you are a rapid program, you can do other things. So your project design will dictate what your eligible and approved costs will be for the HUD money, as well as the matching funds. Remember, you can't call anything match that HUD wouldn't have paid for if they had the money to fully fund your program. As you go through your grant cycle, you may have changes that you have to make. You can make very small changes in your budget that was approved by HUD in your contract, as long as it's less than 10% of the budget line item. So there'll be things that change over the course of time, but just know you can have changes, but don't look at the list of say, oh, I couldn't have done anything. When you wrote your application, you locked yourself into a design. And if you're going to change that design, I guess, significantly, then you're going to need to go back to both the funder and the CoC and get permission to do that. So again, real quick overview of eligible costs. Leasing, as I talked about, is one of the housing ways to pay for housing units. Leasing doesn't have a match requirement. So if you have $10,000 in leasing funds, you don't have to provide a 25% match on that. But for leasing, you cannot own the units and you have to stay within the fair market rent, which is the FMR, with the HUD funds that you're using. So it's great because you can go get the unit, secure the unit, but there are rent caps and there are rules about who can own the unit that you're leasing. So that may or may not work for your design, but leasing is eligible. Leasing is typically a transitional housing or a PSH cost. Leasing is not a rapid rehousing cost. For leasing, you can do security deposits. So you may use your HUD funds to do that, or you may use matching funds. You can do first and last month's rent. And then just a tip, because this comes up all the time, for leasing, if the unit is vacant, you can continue to pay for that unit with HUD funds until you get your next participant, because you as the agency are the leaseholder with the landlord. So you can't just skip the rent because there's no one in the unit. So there's no gap in paying that because you have a contracting person. So we're going through these eligible costs. You want to think like, am I going to use HUD money to do this? Or am I going to use my matching funds to do this? That's why I like to go with these eligible costs. For rental assistance, it's a little bit different than leasing, also pays for housing units. Rental assistance can be used to pay for an apartment that the tenant rents. It can be used to pay for a unit that an agency is renting and then subleasing to a participant. It can also be used to pay for units that are project-based. So maybe you had a new project come up and you have 3 of the units of the 20 are going to be set aside for you. So they're project-based rental assistance with CoC program. So you could say, hey, Melanie, like, welcome to the program. We have these 3 units. Do you want one of them? So rental assistance, there's a bunch of different models. It can be short, medium, or long-term. Long-term, over 24 months is PSH projects. Under 24 months are those rapid rehousing designs that I was talking about. So rapid rehousing can be up to 24 months of rental assistance, but it doesn't have to be. You're going to have local policies and project policies about how you determine if people are going to be 3, 6, 9, 12, or over 12 months of assistance. For rental assistance, there is a matching requirement, so it's 25% of the money that you spend. People like rental assistance because you can go above the FMR with HUD funds if your budget can support that. So you can be a little bit more competitive in the market as you're trying to secure funds against other voucher programs that are probably available. Rental assistance, again, has similar options for extra things beyond the rent. First and last month's rent, you can use HUD money for security deposit. Rental assistance allows damages for PSH projects, not rapid, of up to 1 month. So if you're not using your HUD funds, you're using other funds for that, yours, or if you have a community fund for that, that could be matching funds. And you can do vacancy payments up to 30 days. So in rental assistance, if the unit is empty, you can't pay for an empty unit for more than 30 days. You could also, with rental assistance, pay for staff overhead. So people that are doing the inspections, the rental calculation, all of the staff time that it takes to put a voucher out into your community. I like to include this slide because a lot of people use matching funds to cover the staff time, but HUD forgot when they did the interim rule to put these allowable expenses in there. So I like to include this slide so you have it for reference. Also on the HUD website in some of the project startup trainings from, I want to say like 2015, maybe 2017 now, it's been a while. But you have this slide, but HUD also has them published. So for rental assistance, again, paying the rents to landlords, doing that monthly rent roll to say like who's in an apartment, who do I want finance to send a check out to, talking to families, so talking to my family, saying, okay, what is your income? Who's going to be living in the unit? Let's, calculate out what your portion is and what my portion is going to be. Helping people find the units, the housing, giving them assistance with getting those housing units secured, inspecting the units, which has to be done, and what takes a lot of time, right? Receiving people into the program. So coordinate entry will give you a referral. You have to find that person. You have to get their documentation. You have to enter them into the program. So you could use HUD money to pay for these activities if you have it available. You have to promise when you do a housing project, you promise the HUD X number of units. So if you promise them 10 units, if you can pay for 10 units and some staff costs, great. If the 10 units are really expensive because you're in a high rent area, then you'll probably need to use matching funds to pay for the staff portion. So this could be match, it could be your cash, it could be HUD's cash. It's just something to think about. It's allowable. Again, it was just left out of the interim rule, so I'd like to provide it here. Supportive services is a big category. This is the case management, outreach, transportation, all the things that help people be successful in getting and maintaining housing. Here again is a quick list. You'll have all these slides distributed after the presentation. This is just a quick list of what HUD allows for supportive services. In the interim rule that governs our program, there are deeper descriptions of each of these. If you want to see what HUD means by moving costs, what HUD means by childcare and education, all of that information is in the CoC program interim rule. And there is a Rhode Island CoC, I think it's a project implementation guide. I can't remember the exact thing. There's a manual on your CoC website that goes into this in a little more depth about what is allowable under each category. HMIS I talked about a little bit. This is a big umbrella for your lead, but as a project, you may be doing certain things around trainings, activating licenses, all of those types of things. Project administration is a budget line item I'm hoping that you all have. It is a project, it's the budget line item that allows you to bill for your reporting time, the overview of like budgets and setting the budgets. Trainings like the one you're at today would be billed to your project administration budget line item. Or if you're not billing HUD for this, then again, you can obviously pay for it with matching funds if you have cash match within your agency. So that's a quick overview of costs, eligible costs, and program components. I'm going to pause for questions, and then we're going to go into match. So, oh, thank you, Rosa. Rosa, the toolkit, that's what the toolkit that I talked about, that is available on the Rhode Island website. Rosa, was there any questions that came up as I was talking about the kind of overview topics?
No, I didn't see any questions come up.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's dive into match. So, okay, so first poll question. What type of match, if you know, do you have for your project? Do you have what's called in-kind match, cash match, maybe of both? You can have a mix. Or if you don't know what I'm saying, because you're new to this topic, and you'll let me know once I explain these terms to you, what they are. So go ahead and pop in the chat just kind of what kind of match it is that you know that you have for your project that you're here to learn more about today. In kind, which would come from an external partner, cash, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's cash that's put into your project budget and that you then spend. Both, or not sure yet because you don't know what they mean. In kind is definitely the more typical source that I see. Cash is hard to get nowadays. There's not a lot of unrestricted funds out there. Okay, so 3 in kind. As we talk about in kind, I'm going to go through the different types because you can have in kind services, you can have in kind goods, you can have, there's a bunch of different types. So I'm going to go over each one and then tell you what the documentation requirements are for it. If you didn't put anything in chat because you're shy or because you're like, I have no idea, I'm not going to put anything in there. Again, we're going to talk about all this, and I hope at the end you will go find your project application, find that final commitment that you made to HUD and know what it is so that you know what you need to get documented. Okay, so what is match? Match is money or services that you are bringing to the project that HUD awarded you. So HUD gives you X number of dollars. You're bringing in 25% match for all budget line items except for leasing. The cost can be, again, cash, which is exactly like it sounds. You got an award from United Way or a foundation, they give you money, you're going to say, this money is going to project A, which HUD funded, and I'm going to spend it on these staffing costs, or I'm going to spend it on security deposits. In-kind match is different types of services or goods that your partners in the agency are bringing to your project. Or it could be that you're a very large agency, so you have a housing department, you have a case management department, and that case management department is going to set aside 10 spaces so that people in your housing project can get case management as part of that, project enrollment. All things that are in kind must be documented in writing, right? You have to have the commitment for the person that's giving you that service. If you have a supportive service in kind match, you have to have an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, prior to your grant agreement execution if you're new, and absolutely prior to you start counting those dollars. I'm going to go into that more. Also wanted to let you know that for match, you can use program income, which is a term we're not going to go into a lot today, but program income is basically revenue that you're generating based on your activities. If you're a leasing project or a project that has a leasing budget line item or an operating budget line item, it is possible that you generate program income. If you're a rental assistance project, you are typically not generating program income. Program income is typically when I, as the tenant, pay the agency for rent that they've already paid to the landlord. So that money is considered program income. You have to spend it back on eligible activities, and HUD allows you to use that as matching funds. So again, it's typically only leasing budget line items and operating budget line item projects that will have program income. Rental assistance, not typically a generator of that. Cash match, it's the easiest source. We all love it, but people still end up stumbling when they have cash match because they don't track it. So if you are lucky enough to have a cash award that you can then put towards your project design and all your housing, staffing, administrative costs, then you have to know that you have to work closely with your finance department to document where the cash came from. And most importantly, what did you spend it on? It's not enough to say, I spent $50,000 on project A, which was a HUD project. You need to say, and I bought, and I paid for. So it's really important that if you have cash match, which is great, really easy up front, you still have to track that through your general ledger. You still have to understand how it got spent. Your finance department, in partnership with your project staff, have to be able to say, we got $10,000 from United Way, we allocated it to project A, and we actually spent it on. So it can't be money that was allocated and not spent. That's just a commitment. It doesn't count as match unless you actually spent the money on this project and on these participants, if you want it to count towards the 25%. So in-kind match, again, I said there's a bunch of different types. So we have real property, if you're lucky enough, someone gave you a building, equipment, goods, and services. Services is the most typical type of in-kind match. Again, in-kind match and all match is things that HUD would have paid for if they had given you the money for the whole project. So the goods and services can be provided by another project. The in-kind match resources can be, like I said, internal if you're a larger agency and you're partnering with a different department, or external to the agency, which is typically the model that I see more, that you have an external partner who's willing to set aside part of their resources for people that qualify for your housing project. So what is not match? Again, all of the things we're saying today are things that unfortunately we've seen. You can't have match be something that you already used. So if you have 4 HUD projects and you got a $10,000 United Way award, the $10,000 was allocated to project A. You can't allocate the same $10,000 to B, C, and D. It's already been spent. You can't say you're matching multiple programs. A dollar is a dollar, a service is a service. You can't use it twice. You can't use any contributions that are statutorily prohibited. So if a NOFO or the regulation or the source of the funds say you can't use this, then you can't use it. There's no getting around that. If you do an in-kind service match, but you forget the MOU, dates are wrong on the MOU, maybe your January grant start and you don't do your MOU till July, you can count July to December, but you can't count January to June. So in-kind services without an MOU, HUD can hold your feet to the fire here and say, sorry, we're only allowing the match that was July to December that was within the MOU timeframe. So it's really important to get those executed before you want to start counting dollars. You cannot take a participant's money and call it match. So if you have a voluntary savings programs where people are putting a portion of their money in a savings account, that is not your money, that is not match. If someone is getting food stamps in your project or any other kind of benefits, again, that is not the project's money, that's the participant's money. So things, and also things that are ineligible. If HUD wasn't going to pay for it, you definitely can provide it if it's useful, but it's not going to count towards your match. I've said this a few times, but it's always good to write it down. 25% is the goal. So 25% either cash or in kind of all budget line items. So project admin, HMIS, leasing, rental assistance, whatever it is that you have, supportive services, 25% is what you have to provide. And again, at the end of the day, it's what you spent, but hopefully you're spending your full grant. So it'll be 25% of the grant award minus any leasing budget line items. You have to be able to document. It's not enough to just say, I did this, we do good work, thank you. Just believe me, you have to have the documentation to back that up, and we'll talk about that a lot more. It's also important to know for match, it used to be, if you were here 20 plus years ago, it used to be you could only match apples and apples. So it'd be leasing and leasing on rental assistance and rental assistance. Now HUD has opened that up. So since the CoC program, you can match apples and oranges. So you have an entire project budget. Just because you have rental assistance, all of your match could be in supportive services, or all of your match is rental assistance and HUD pays for the supportive services. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one anymore. It's your entire project minus your leasing dollars that need match provided, but it's not a one, each budget line item doesn't have to have its own 25% match. Here's an example of a project without leasing funds on the left and with leasing funds on the right. So you can see, I'm not going to read all these numbers to you, but you can kind of see the math go along. At the end of the day, a project without leasing funds, this is a rental assistance project of this award, their match would be $12,000 based on the math that we have or the numbers that we have here. If you have leasing funds, remember those are excluded from your calculation. So your match would only be $7,375. Again, great benefit in a kind of resource constrained environment. But please know that leasing projects have their own pros and cons about who can rent the units and the rent caps that you can use the federal money and any matching money for. So there's other program considerations, not just the match, but it is good to know if you're a leasing project, either a PSH leasing or a TH as part of a joint component project, that you do have a lesser match requirement. You may still have services that you provide, you just don't have to track them as match. Okay, this is just another kind of visualization of the apples to apples versus apples to oranges. You can see for here, we have a project, they have operating, HUD funds that totally, so they're paying for all the housing costs. There's no match coming from the community agency side. Services, HUD pays nothing, so you're bringing in $25,000, either cash, which again is money going through your budgeting system, or in-kind services from a partner or another department within your agency. Project administration, everybody plays a little bit, and then you can see how the math plays out. So this is just an example to think about when you're doing your application. So the question you probably all want to know is, where do I get this cash? You keep saying cash is great, even though I have to track it. So The places that people get cash, they have their own resources. Maybe you are an agency that's amazing at fundraising. You have your own cash that way. Maybe there's another way that you're generating revenue that you can then take that revenue and allocate it to project applications. Cash match could be another funder who says, hey, like I like that housing program you're doing. I want more transportation available to the people of my population. I'm going to give you a grant for $10,000 to help pay for transportation. And I want you to allocate it to this program. So you could take that grant, which will come in as cash, and you're going to put it in this budget. You're going to track the spending, tell HUD about it, and tell the funder about that. Sometimes state and local governments also give contracts. So the project could be like co-funded between the federal government and local or state governments. Sometimes you have foundations that will give grants. Sometimes those are for 1 year, 5 years, right? Longer. Sometimes there's contributions, like I was talking about the leasing projects. You may be charging people a portion of the rent that you pay to the landlord, and you put that back into the project as program income. That's cash. You get a check for $200 into your budget. You spend it back out on an eligible activity like rent or eligible staff costs. So those are some of the places that I've seen cash match come from. Let's do a little quick, like, make sure this all makes sense, quiz. Much better when we're in person, but let's give this a go remotely. So these are just 4 examples. I clearly love the United Way and hope that they give you lots of money. But in this top example, United Way gives the recipient or the subrecipient who's helping manage the program $15,000 to fund a portion of the case management in the HUD funded project. What do people think? What category of match would that be? Would that be cash? Would that be in kind? Would it be eligible, ineligible? I'm gonna ask people to put some information in the chat. We have a quiet group. We knew a Friday training would be tricky. I have one in kind. Okay, so I have United Way, which is a funder. They're giving $15,000 award, and that award is going to go to the HUD funded project. This would be an example of cash match. So United Way isn't the one providing the case management. They're going to provide you with money that you're going to take that award in, log it in your finance system, allocate it to this HUD funded project A. You're going to hire a case manager, pay for them between these monies and other monies, track on their timesheets how you're spending that money, bill that, tell United Way what you spent on, tell HUD. So this would be an example of cash match. We'll go across to the blue box. Project recipient or subrecipient enters into an MOU with Victory Inc. to provide substance abuse counseling. What do you think? In kind, cash, eligible, ineligible? What would HUD think about this one? In kind? Other thoughts? Is HUD is a supportive services? I know I went over that one fast. You're on the slide yet, but substance abuse counseling, that would, right? Like, in kind, ineligible. Okay. Okay, let's play this through. So if I have an MOU with Victory Inc. So I have a HUD program, and let's just say it's a PSH program, and I'm targeting people who have a disability, right? Because for PSH, you have to have disability and have experienced homelessness per the HUD definition. Part of my project design, I might be serving people with substance use disorder. But it might be my agency doesn't provide this type of counseling. But it might be something that some of my participants do want to access. So I couldn't require that everybody goes to counseling, but as long as I had an MOU, as long as the MOU is dated within my project grant term with HUD, this would be an eligible example of in-kind match. The key is the MOU is the first part, right? Getting those slots put aside. If I serve 10 people and nobody uses the substance abuse counseling, Victory Inc., then it is match, right? It's available to people, but it's not going to count towards what I'm reporting at the end of my grant term. So it's set up beautifully administratively. I have an MOU. I'm going to assume my dates are correct. substance abuse counseling is an eligible supportive service, so HUD would support that if they funded an entire project. But what you're going to need to make sure this is countable in-kind service match is you're going to need Victory Inc. to be tracking who those folks are, have releases so that they can tell you about that, be able to cost out what the counseling session costs. So that way they can submit that to you as the recipient or subrecipient so that you can have that information for your document and to be able to report on the APR. So this would be eligible and it would be considered in-kind service match. I talked a lot about transportation, about the ins and outs. So let's go to the yellow square. Here I have a subrecipient uses a donated van to transport clients to job training, GED classes to finish their degrees, and weekend movies. So some entertainment, some job training, and some education. What do folks think? So subrecipient, meaning I have a contract with someone who has a direct contract with HUD. Transportation, eligible costs, I have a van. What do folks think? Any brave souls want to type in the box or say it out loud? So vans are tricky. I haven't said this yet, so I'll say it now. I always tell people for match, it is burden. So what I suggest is going after the biggest bucket of match funds that you can find to decrease the amount of documentation that you have to put in place, keep track of, and make sure that it happens. But as you're putting your project design together, depending on how big your project is, this could be definitely in-kind goods, right? So there's a donated van. Transporting clients to job training and education are eligible activities. Weekend movies are not. Entertainment is very important as a human being, but not something that HUD will pay for. So to be able to use this donated van, what you would need to have in place are systems to show, because I'm assuming if it's donated van and I have these activities, it's probably something the whole agency can access. So you're going to have some type of a log. You're going to have a log that says like Monday, Project A, which is the HUD project, took this van to transport Melanie to job training, dropped her off, came back later. So your agency should have some way of tracking who's using the van, and then allocating out the costs of the gas, the insurance, all of that. So that could be used as matching funds. Again, that may be a little small number. It might be something you do just because it's good practice and policy, but you don't count as match because you don't need that small of a bucket. But if you're scrambling for match or you feel like you just aren't sure of the sources that you have, if everyone's going to use all of the services that you have MOUs for, and you already have a way to track this donated van use for your HUD project clients for eligible things, this is good to have in your back pocket. So it is possibly match. It just depends on how good your documentation is. And if your agency has a way to allocate out the money that is supporting the van. If it was donated just to HUD Project A, you would just have to exclude the entertainment time. So it came into your project, you would somehow show like 80% of the activities are for eligible things, 20% would not be matched. So there's a bunch of different ways to cut that. This might not be your first source, but it is good to know these other little things that you can put together. As money gets tighter, there's less unrestricted funds. Just good to know your options. So this last one, the green one on the right, is Department of Labor, DOL, provides a recipient, so direct contract with HUD, with a contract to pay for the gas to transport clients to job training, GED, and weekend movies, the same things. So I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but it would be the same as the van, right? Like, yes, this could be match, depending on how they funded it and how you build. It's probably cash match if they're giving you cash and you're running it through your general ledger. This really depends on how your finance sets things up on whether it's cash or in kind. But as long as it's eligible clients who are in your project and it's eligible uses, this could also be a source of match. Okay, any questions there before we take a quick break And then we're going to dive into documentation and a few more examples. I didn't see any in the chat, so let me just pull up the Q&A real quick. Hopefully it's not just because it's Friday. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but if you have them, please put them in the Q&A, or if you want to wait till the end when we stop the recording, you can ask them then also. What we're going to do is let's take an 8-minute break instead of a 10-minute break. Let's all come back at 3:15 and we'll jump right back into record keeping and how to document all this good work that you're going to do. Think of any questions that you may have about match requirements. We are going to now dive into record keeping and monitoring requirements. So let's get into the depth of this. So record keeping requirements for the CoC program, there's a lot of them. You can see on the slide, there's so much more than what we're talking about today. So again, just like to kind of provide that as a reference for all of the other activities you do related to your CoC program. These are all the things you have to keep records about. But today we're talking about the one at the bottom. We're talking about match record keeping specifically. As part of the CoC interim role, you have to maintain records at your organizational level. So think your project design, your eligibility, what you're doing for budgets, your project level. So that would be the match documentation that we talked about. It would be the financial information about this project specifically, as well as your participant files. Participant files are also sometimes, depending on your source, part of the match documentation because you will have to prove that something happened. So let's say you're using case management. We'll keep picking on that case management as your match resource. There'll be notes, right, from whoever's providing that case management to show that something actually happened. So it'll be, I provided 2 hours of case management, and these are the activities I did. So the case management notes, which are typically part of a participant file, either at your agency or your partner agency, could be part of your matching requirements. So it's really important to know there's many layers, and you have to know where these documents live so that you can gather them or be able to gather them when the HUD asks you for your backup documentation for match. I am glad, especially on a Friday afternoon, that you all took time to come to this training because match is one of the top findings that HUD has of not meeting your match. And it's one of the few findings that really does have a financial consequence. So if you don't meet your match because you don't have your documentation, even though you did it, HUD can ask you to pay back funds. So I don't want any of you to end up in that space. This we talked about it at the beginning. If you're a more visual person, you can use the table. If you like words better, you can use this. But these are again, those steps where I was talking about where you're going to actually document match and have something in your file showing you're going through the process. Project application, you're going to have that initial commitment, your initial plan, what you think the match was going to be, the scope of the match, what it was going to pay for. Then you're going to get awarded, hopefully your full project, maybe a partial. Then HUD is going to give you contracts. You're going to have formal agreements at that point. So that commitment letter from, your peer agency for psychiatric evals then becomes a formal agreement to actually provide that. How many clients? What is it going to cost you? How are they going to document all of those things? Number 3 is what I really want to talk about here under documentation is kind of the so what. So I made this great plan. I have amazing documentation. It's so beautiful. But did it happen is your most important question. Most people stop at step 1, step 2, good, go. And in 3 years, they're like, what happened? What do you mean no one got referred to the agency? What do you mean the case management position never got filled, so we never referred? So if you're the project manager, you're the finance person, if you have any finance staff on today, your job is to then think during the project, did I spend the cash? Did the cash come through? Did I bill for the resources, right? Like, did I spend that cash award from another agency? And then can I see it in my finance system? If you have the in-kind partners, are you checking in monthly, quarterly, no less than halfway through the year? Definitely not at the end of the year, but minimum once a year. Are you checking to make sure people are using those resources? Because just because you have an agreement Doesn't mean everybody wants substance use counseling. Maybe they don't want it from that either. Maybe they already have a relationship. So making sure that the resources that you set up are actually being used. And can you prove it? Just saying you did it isn't enough. If that agency closes, your relationship sours, HUD comes in 2 years, how are you going to prove that these things happened? If you didn't come up with during your MOU and your initial plan on how you're going to document that, how you get access to that documentation, how you keep that documentation safe and secure in your process. And then again, the financial tracking systems. Some of you, if you're not already friends with your finance staff, please go be friends with your finance staff. You are partners in this to be able to prove that your tracking match, your spending match, especially if it's cash match. Typically in-kind match from other agencies, your finance department's not going to get into that, but it might be something that they can help you think through. Or if you're requesting something from another agency and you're kind of getting a little pushback on that, they can maybe speak finance terms to the other finance person who's like, no, absolutely not doing that. It's too much work. They can talk about how you're already doing it internally based on the fact that you're the one that has the HUD award. So don't do this and then forget about it. Set up some type of system to monthly or at least quarterly check in to make sure your plan is happening as you hoped it would happen. We already talked about this, but just again, reference when you're like, oh my God, what did she say about new projects, renewal projects? Just kind of what the expectation is. If you're new, it is 99% certain that they're going to ask you for MOUs for all of your in-kind services. If you're a renewal, they have the right to ask you for it. I've seen it go both ways. Really depends on the project, the HUD staff, and probably your project history on how you've been doing with match. But just because HUD doesn't request it doesn't mean that it's not required anymore. The second bullet here about changing the sources, totally okay, right? Like you are doing these quarterly checks, like I'm suggesting. You're like, wow, like no one's using the service anymore. The bus line doesn't go there anymore. People can't get there. You can change that, but again, you have to have the MOU in place and you can't start counting those funds until you have the MOU in place for the date ranges that you need it to be. So if you planned on using agency B as your matching source, but for some reason they either don't have the staffing, they've had turnover, or participants aren't going there, but you notice another agency just started this and you see a lot of your housing participants and tenants going there, you could talk to them, talk about an MOU, talk about what it means, talk about documentation requirements, and then you can put that in place. It doesn't have to match your grant term. It could be for 9 months of your grant term. It could be that a partner has like a 6-month contract for something that's going to be really helpful to your client, but it's only 6 months. That's totally fine as long as it works for you and the people that you're serving. So don't get hung up on perfection, like it all has to be 12 months. Of course, that's the easiest for administrative lives, but you can change your match source. You don't have to notify HUD when you change your match source, but you want to be ready. If you said that you had half in kind and half cash match, and then your cash match was United Way, and HUD comes, they say, hey, show me your match. And you send them a letter from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation instead of United Way, they might scratch their head and go, what? So you should just have notes, right, in your grant management file, like initial plan was United Way, that money got reallocated to whatever. We got this new grant, we're using it for this activity. So you should be able to understand and be able to explain 2 years later, like what happened? Did we do this on purpose? Did we really spend it in this way? So you don't have to get HUD's permission to change your match source, but I have seen recipients have a lot of explaining to do and they can't explain why they had 100% cash match and now it's 100% in kind and there's no MOUs and they can't really kind of keep the thread of what happened. It makes HUD question what else kind of maybe wasn't being watched. So it's totally allowable. Just make sure you understand the steps and you have that documented somewhere so you can explain it at a later date and time. Again, we talked about the grant period. The match does have to happen during the grant period. So if something happens before or after, it would be in those grant terms. Your grant term is a fixed start and end date. So you can get the documentation afterwards, but when the documentation comes in, if you're lucky enough to be like a January to December grant, anything in January of the following year doesn't count as match. But if you happened in December and you got it in January, that's fine. It's about the date that the activity took place. That is what's going to decide which grant term it counts towards. And again, please keep your documentation. I know we all are overloaded with paper and there's electronic files and there's storage considerations, but please do not destroy anything that you may need at a later time. It's not enough to just say we do good work and I definitely did this. You're gonna have to prove it in writing. I believe most of these FAQs are still up on the HUD Exchange. If you find that they're not, I may have the source information somewhere that I can provide you, but I'm hoping at last time I checked, these were all still active on the HUD Exchange. So basically HUD published FAQs, which are frequently asked questions about match when they launched the CoC program. So the information that is in these FAQs is also in the CoC program interim rule. But we all know that rules and regulations are a little harder to read, but they did take that information and put it into FAQs and published it on the HUD Exchange, which is where HUD puts a lot of the information about the CoC program, rules, requirements, and different notices that they put out. So for cash match, people always say like, okay, happy to do cash match, but what do you want on this letter? Like what has to be on it? And these are the elements. So if someone is giving you cash match from the outside and they say, what do you need me to write down? This is the list that you send them. So it has to say how much. And again, let's say really obvious things in the next 15 minutes, but just bear with me. These are things that people miss all the time. When is the cash coming, right? Because HUD doesn't know the cycle of your foundations and your United Ways and your fundraisers. They want to know, like, when is this cash going to be available? Because they can then compare that to your operating year to make sure they are at least during the same time period. The person should also say which grant and fiscal year they think they're contributing to. So in your application, you might say like the FY26 March something something to February something something fiscal year. So they need to name that in the thing so that way whoever's reviewing it knows that they understand who they're giving the money to. You would provide your partner with that information or your finance department with that information because that's information you as the CoC program manager are going to be able to accurately talk about. It's not something that other people can accurately say without a deep understanding of the funding cycle. They also need to say what you can spend it on. So just giving you $15,000 is amazing. But again, both you and the project that's giving you money or the agency that's giving you money, you need to be in agreement. Are we spending this on like staff bonuses and staff like enrichment? Or are we spending it on rent or services or transportation? So it needs to say what's allowable. Sometimes you can get away with the general like CoC program activities. But the more specific you can be, the better. That way, if all of us leave because we won the lottery in all different states, then the person who comes behind us says, hey, what can I use this $15,000 for? Like, you want to make sure you're kind to those that are coming behind you. So someone is doing cash match documentation, either internally or externally. These are the things that you want to see on that letter. For all the documentation, letterhead, signed, dated, legible signature, or type underneath who this person is and their title so that we know they have the authority to give you the cash. So you can't commit on someone else's behalf. You can't say, United Way is going to give us this. Like United Way typically has to say, I'm going to give you the project this. So you need to know that the person's authorized. So everything's letterhead, signed, dated, legible, signatures, please. In-kind goods, again, this is completely an allowable category. It's not something I see as much because it's usually much smaller amounts of funding and documentation. You're going to go after your biggest bucket you can for the match to decrease your overhead, the time that you're spending on administrative activities. But if you have a regular source of donated goods to your project that are easily tracked, knowing what those goods are, describing them, the dates, again, the same thing, the grant, the fiscal year, who they're going to be contributed to, and how you're determining the method. So if they are food items, how are you determining the method? If it's furniture, if your program design allows furniture, if it's the van, like how are you deciding, right, the value of that donation, and just documenting that in the letter. In-kind services match documentation. Again, this is where most of you are going to be living. When you're talking about match documentation, this MOU is very important. HUD was very lenient the first 5 years. I have not seen them be lenient in the recent past. So definitely have these in place. MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. It has to have an unconditional commitment. The only condition I've seen HUD accept is if you get awarded as a project. It can't say like, well, if we have the money next year and if we have a competition and make it seem like the money just isn't going to exist. It's only if the project is awarded. That's the only condition I've seen accepted by HUD. The specific service, so are you partnering for psych eval? Are you partnering for counseling? Are you partnering for transportation, outreach? Like, what is it that you are partnering for? Who's going to be providing the service is really important, and how much that service costs per hour. Sometimes it's a range if it's different specialties and licensures. Typically, it's one hourly cost based on each type of service they're going to be providing to your housing tenants. The time frame, again, HUD wants to make sure it's during the grant term. Otherwise, it's amazing, but not helpful to your match obligation. And then this last one, we all read top to bottom and we always forget the last bullet. But it's the most important for you, who's going to be the one who has to fulfill the commitment to HUD. You're responsible. What system are you going to be used to document the actual level and the value of the service provided? This makes sure that your agency and their agency have agreed to share documentation. They have talked with their finance department about valuing the services, like what did this hour of case management cost? What did this hour of counseling or psych eval, like what did it cost us? It's really important because the partner who's providing, they don't have any obligation to HUD, right? Like they're not going to get in trouble for not doing it. You are the one that's going to have to cut a check back to HUD. So proactively talking about that documentation system and then following up on it to make sure it works. If it's a new partner, you may have some like kind of wrinkles to make sure like it's working for both sides, you're both getting what you want. I have seen, unfortunately, it happen that at the end, like people are like, oh, well, they have the documentation, I'll get it when I need it. There's turnover at the agency, relationships break down. They're like, no, I'm not giving it to you. You don't have a release anymore. And they're like, but we said, and we're like, well, I'm not doing it. So really trying to think like, am I gonna hold the documentation? So it's in my client files. If I'm not, how do I get that information in 3 years after the client's gone, if we're all gone? That last bullet is really important, but it's a step that a lot of people miss in their in-kind service MOUs. Here's some more specifics to kind of take those high-level bullets and drill down even more. HUD should, hopefully will, so that you don't end up in a problem, kick back any MOUs that do not have these elements. Again, this is all the CoC program rule, but this is a little bit easier way to kind of create a checklist to match against your MOUs. It needs to say who, who you are, who they are, who the points of contact are. So when, again, you need to follow up, you know who to call at the agency. Was it the person you were negotiating the contract with, and someone else is going to help you with the documentation? Like, who is it? Who are the two people that are making this happen for the project and the partner? Again, we talked about unconditional. The scope of services. So again, specific contract, HUD wants to know it's really them and not just a general commitment. How long? Again, sometimes maybe they can only commit to 6 months. Totally fine. You just do another 6-month one later when they feel like they can commit more. How many people? So this helps you and it helps HUD know like, okay, maybe you have a 20-person project. Maybe only 10 people are going to be able to access the service because of their restrictions and kind of their client load. How many people at one time and how many people over the course of the grant term. Don't overpromise here. Always can overdeliver, but don't have people overpromise. And then you have this kind of false sense of security and maybe not everybody opts into the service that the partner is providing, what the qualifications are, if it's substance abuse counseling, are they licensed, if it's psychiatric evaluations, again, what's the licensure, if it's outreach, just qualifications, and then the estimated value. So think hourly rate, or if it's a service, it's by, it's a flat fee or whatever it is, then whatever that would be. And again, it's always the last one, which is why everybody misses it, but the documentation requirements. So like, how are you going to share information that could be protected by HIPAA if it's HIPAA covered agency that is confidential, right? It's my information, it's my personal like service information. And then when are you going to do this? Agree up front. Are we doing this monthly, quarterly, no less than quarterly? Like working out some of those details in writing. So when everybody, right, goes and wins the lottery or takes new jobs, the people that are left are like, oh yeah, we agreed to this. I might not do it again, but this is what we agreed to. And this is how we're going to make sure our partner doesn't have to pay any money back to HUD. So this I would just use as a checklist against your MOUs. You can also give this to any partners if you're like, oh, what do you need me to include in this letter? You can provide this as well. I would say do as much work as you can because you need this more than your partner does. So cash match, this is a kind of older version of what cash match could look like. But the kind of takeaway from, I'm going to show you a good match and a bad match, is on this example, everything ticks and ties. So I have, again, my friends at United Way, I hope they are still flush with cash and giving me money, but they gave me $100,000. I brought that in, my finance department knows about it, they put it in my project. I have a letter saying I actually got the money. That letter says I can use it towards anything I want, but their preference is this HUD project, that I can use it for, let's say, case management or outreach services, whatever it is they may have restrictions on. And then all the numbers throughout this example will tick and tie. So if I had $100,000, I spent $100,000. I didn't spend $110,000. I can prove it. Again, if everybody goes away and you leave me as your monitor in a room all by myself, after a few minutes, I'm going to be able to make sense of this, right? I'm going to say, okay, I get it. They got money. They spent it on eligible things that I would pay for. I'm going to be able to back this up with timesheets because it's all within my financial system. Great. Not so good match. We know it happened. We're pretty sure it happened. We changed the plan halfway through, but don't worry, right? Like we fixed it. No, we didn't spend it twice. This one will make any reviewer go, what? What happened? So again, we have this generous United Way contract or award of $100,000. But then my budget says 80,000. So I'm like, I wonder where the 20 went. First question. You don't want monitors to ever ask questions. You just want them to understand and be impressed. Then there's not a grant letter. So like maybe they only got 80,000. Maybe they wanted 100,000. I don't know what changed. If I go over here to the left side, now I'm looking and I'm like, okay, they gave me 100. I booked 80, but I spent 140. I don't know. Like what it just makes you start wondering like, how's your documentation? Show me more. You're just going to start digging, right, at that point. And you don't want them to dig. You want the information to make sense. You can't spend 140,000 if you only have 100. And you definitely can't spend 140,000 if you only have 80. So just making sure that if you step away for a second and look at your documentation, does it make sense without you in the room? I'm sure a lot of you on this, things change, right? Like the plan changes halfway through any year. But make sure that your documentation is clear after the change and it doesn't have these kind of outliers. Like maybe, you got rid of outreach and you just had mental health counseling. Like maybe that was the change. No one's going to know that from this example. And it just opens up questions to, can you show me, are you sure you didn't use this on another program? Like, was this our match? Was it someone else's? Show me more is not a phrase that you want HUD or any monitor to kind of like ask of you because they're confused about something that you could have looked at ahead of time and sorted out before you sent this into your funder or your monitor. So I think we've talked about this. This is again just a reminder. You're like, what was she saying about that documentation? I suggest at least quarterly reviews. When I was in your shoes, when I was new at this, I did it once a year. It didn't work out so good. I had a lot of follow-up to do, a lot of explaining to do. So don't do what I did in the beginning. Do what I did at the end. Do quarterly, do a check-in. Make sure that all the parties still exist in their jobs and are still agreeing to what you agreed to. Provide your partner agencies, make it easy for them to say yes and be your partner. Give them a tracking sheet. If they don't like it, you can negotiate maybe a little bit about what's on it, but like, don't make them come up with their own systems. If you need the information, go ahead and give them a format. Again, you can negotiate what that is to make sure it doesn't add burden, but don't just assume that they know the rules because they're not intuitive. Sometimes what you can do is instead of going every quarter like into those charts, you and your the billing departments, right, might be able to talk and say like, hey, how much case management did you do for like our clients? Like what is your billing showing you? Like, are we close? Are we under? Are we over? And then you can follow up with the program staff to make sure like the documentation is there and that the finances are matching what you're seeing at the project level. So if you just need to do like quick checks monthly or quarterly to make sure people are using the information, that's always pretty helpful. And then maintain the timesheets. So you need to make sure that, especially if it's staff time that you're using as match, either cash match internally or external, you have to show that the person did the work. It's not enough to say 25% of Melanie's time is going to be committed to project A at agency B over here. I also have to prove that I then spent 25% of my time on your clients in this project, not just with the agency, right? In the HUD project there. So make sure that timesheets are being maintained and that your partner has a way to share those timesheets with you. So again, just kind of mapping this out ahead of time to see where the sweet spot is for like making sure you're meeting the HUD requirements without creating too much administrative burden. Okay. Okay, we're coming to the end. So if you have any questions, think about them, put them in the QA, be ready to go off mute. Common findings, probably going to go through this a little quick because I've probably talked about them a lot as we've been going through this topic. But basically for monitoring, just overview, HUD expects that you monitor yourself internally. HUD expects that recipients, who's the one with the contract, monitors their sub-recipients at least annually. HUD expects that the CoC is monitoring recipient performance. In Rhode Island, you do it based on a risk management tool that's done annually, and reviews by HUD and by you to your recipients and subrecipients can either be remote or on-site. HUD has been doing a lot of remote monitoring even before kind of the activities that happened this year. So I think that would be safe to expect that there will be remote monitoring. In which case you're going to have to upload all this documentation I talked about. You have to upload it to their portal. So having it in a kind of mode and way that you can easily do that, that's explainable, again, without you sitting in the room with them explaining it, this documentation really does need to kind of stand on its own. So I talked about this. One of the most common findings is there's just not enough match. You promised 100,000, you only gave them 50, but you spent all the HUD money. They can ask you to write a check. Having service match, in-kind service match with no use, they have to disallow anything that's not within the MOU timeframe. Or if there's no MOU at all, you've lost all your match for the year. That's a tough conversation to have. And not tracking it. So everything in the beginning was great. You did all your work at application, MOU, but then you kind of fell down on the documentation. People are getting services, but there's no case notes, there's no timesheets. Those types of things are what HUD is finding, which then opens this conversation about writing checks, which none of us want to do, to pay back the money that you can't show that you matched. Financial documentations. Again, if your finance team is here, thank you for coming. If they're not, you can share this slide with. It's not tracking actuals, right? Everything, when you look at the financials, they're all based on the plan. I think that Melanie's going to work 25% on this project, but I can't prove that she spent 25% of her time on this project with eligible people. Not having your monthly drawdown from HUD match your documentation that then shows like what some people do. The best way to explain this. Some people will say like I have $5,000 of expenses this month. So from HUD, I'm going to draw down 75% and then 25% I'm going to pay for with my cash some other way. That way I know I'm hitting that 75, 25, that 25% portion. But then when you look at the lock draw, the math just isn't making sense. There's not the supporting documentation to support the 25% cost that you're using your own cash for. The last one, it happens sometimes, it doesn't happen often, but paying rent, like let's say your match is the rent portion, but you're paying it to someone who isn't the actual owner of the property, something has happened, you do your kind of system of checks and balances to make sure that the rent is for the unit that your participant's living in and to someone who has the right to rent you that unit. Those types of things, when they're uncovered later, can impact your match. That one doesn't happen as often, but in it more than you would hope. So staff time, this and the first one of just not having it, common. This is probably, I think, the second most common of, again, using assumptions and projections, not actuals, to cost out and to bill the staff time. So you need to have timesheets that show the person's working on the project. And depending on how you set up your time cards or your timesheets, you may have a second form that is like an activity log that shows like, okay, Melanie works in project A, she does case management, she does rental assistant, and she does project administration. And I would have time in all of those things at various levels on days and weeks and months, depending on what I actually did for my job on any given day. And that you could trace that through payroll and you can show that the staff got their check and that they cashed their check and that you paid it, not that it was like, an uncashed check. Like HUD can check as deep as they want to. Usually they'll stay at that surface level if you're not like basically triggering deep questions for them. They're just gonna say, like, show me payroll, show me that you paid the staff, show me that they were there. And they may not dig into like, and did the person cash the check? Was it direct deposited? But they can. So really understanding, again, that friendship with your finance department, like, what is our system? What does it look like? But making sure that all of your checks and balances, if you have a 2-signature policy on your timesheets, then you should have 2 signatures on your timesheet, your staff and your supervisor. It's all done electronically. You should do it that way instead. So whatever system you've put in place, HUD can hold you accountable to that system. Here are some match resources. Again, I hope they are all still active. If they aren't, please follow up with myself or Rosa, and we'll get you the information if you need it. It's not in these slides, and the links aren't active anymore. Here's some general HUD Exchange resources that you can look at if you have questions about this or other topics. And that is all I have for you today. So this is how to keep in touch with us, but you'll get these slides afterwards. FAQs, hopefully you can link to for the documentation. Rose is going to send out a survey afterwards. If you could fill that out, telling us what you thought of this training, and if there's any future topics or deeper dives that you'd like about anything CoC, please put that on the feedback form or email Rosa directly with any ideas. And let me go back to the most important thing. I've talked to you for 2 hours. It's a Friday, almost 4 o'clock. But you took time to come today. Okay, Rosa, let's pause the recording because we're done with the content. So thank you everyone for coming.